Welcome students for the course, and the subject that I am going to take up with you is Managerial Economics. Myself Simranjeet here, and I have done my Masters and MPhil in Economics, and I am pursuing my research. So I hope that I am able to give the best to you from this lectures. Well, my objective will be first to focus on your content, subject content, and second, to make it as simple as possible for you, especially when we have students coming from different areas and different fields and different you can say, they have never studied actually economics. So I'm basically saying students who are from a non-commerce background. So my whole objective would be to simplify the content as much as possible and give you the best for this class. So I hope you enjoy this session, and keep remembering that whenever we are explaining you, if there is anything that you want to jot down, note down, you can always keep a paper, pencil with you, so that you can keep making your own notes as you listen to these lectures. So I hope you have a nice time, and we are beginning with chapter number 1, that is the introduction to the subject of managerial economics. So as you see, your chapter 1 is titled as Meaning, Scope and Methods of Managerial Economics. Before we go to the study of this subject, many a times what comes into your mind is, why is it important for me to study the subject of managerial economics? First of all, why should I study economics? Okay, one, many students say it's a part of our curriculum, so we have no option. Well, we are already living in a very competitive world, in a very complex environment, where everything you find that there are dynamic changes that are taking place. There is a change in government policies, there are new firms which are coming up, there is change in consumer behavior. So basically the environment in which we are living today is a very competitive environment. In order to survive in this environment, the business firms are always trying to compete, they are trying to upgrade themselves, they are modifying themselves, there is a change in business policies, there is a change in corporate strategies, and of course there is a change in the overall government policies as well. Now, with these changes which are taking place, in order to be competitively fit in this complex business environment, education is also undergoing a change. Today the education field is becoming more market oriented, where we have our aspiring learners like you taking up various courses so that they are competent enough to meet the needs of the market for tomorrow. Well, in this entire course of business and management, today in fact students are aspiring more into business and management courses with time, so that they are, you can say, they are properly trained and finding themselves fit to meet the market needs. Now, in this changing needs of students, and with business and management studies becoming very important, economics is also finding a place in the field of business and management, because economics is surrounding our everyday life. It's not just our everyday life, but even our country and our economy. Today when you open up the newspaper, you find that there are news which there were a time where economic news used to have just one corner of the newspaper, but today they are making headlines. Whether it is a new government policy with respect to import and export, whether it is any type of deal which our country India is having with world countries, they are making the headlines in newspaper. So economics is definitely becoming it's becoming into limelight and catching the front pages of news headlines. So, for the students, an idea and understanding of this subject plays a very important role, especially when it comes to decision making. Because when this paper of managerial economics is designed, the whole idea is how would this paper narrow down the gap between what's existing in the market and what is lying in the books of economics. I don't want to say too much right now. We will be learning it as we go with the slides. So when we talk about business management, we move to this slide. Before we go into details, I have prepared this slide to give you a gist of what chapter 1 would include. So the objectives of chapter 1, as you see over here, will be trying to remember some definitions of managerial economics, moving to features and scope of managerial economics, and finally coming to the methods which are used in managerial economics. So let's understand it with the further slides. In this slide, we give you the most powerful definitions of managerial economics. As you see, one given by Milton Spencer and Louis Sigelman, and the other one is Eugene Brigham and James Pappas. Now, how are they defining? I won't go into the details of this definition because you need to memorize this definition. I would only focus on the keywords of this definition. The keywords of this definition tells us that there are two subjects which are interlinked together in the paper of managerial economics, and that is economic theory and business practice. So you understand that in this subject, you are trying to read and study certain economic concepts, economic tools, which are very familiar to the field of business. Managers make, now if you see Spencer's definition in the last part, he is talking about decision making and forward planning. Well, managers have to take decisions in their day-to-day business activities. What type of decisions do managers take? Decisions with respect to production, right? Production plans, quality control, pricing of the product, and at the same time decisions with respect to the roles and responsibilities which the staff is going to undertake. So there are so many decisions which are short run and long run. Decisions which are long run and which involve more of time, energy, money and other resources are investment decisions. So as you talk about business, there are decisions with respect to setting up of the business, that is investment. Once investment is done, day-to-day short-run decisions like production plans, pricing, quality control, output, input, etc. So there are n number of decisions which a business has to undertake. And here, is there any economic way of looking at these decisions? What happens that economists believe that managers will be able to make efficient decisions if they try to use some principles of economics. So in managerial economics, they are trying to pool together certain economic tools and concepts and laws which can be fruitfully used for the understanding of decision making at business level. And once these decisions are made, what is the next step? Forward planning. Once you have made a decision, like for example, if you apply it to yourself, you have made a decision to enroll in this course. Now what? Now comes the implementation of your decision, like attending the lectures, trying to keep a track of the total number of subjects you have, listening to these video lectures, and then apart from that, whatever is facilitated to you in the course, you will try to be a part of it. So you have actually started planning on how are you going to complete the course, how you are going to prepare your timetable, how you are going to study and reach your goal. So same way, once decisions are made, planning becomes a very important part after that. It's nothing but implementing the decisions. Similarly, when you talk about James Pappas and Eugene Brigham, they are talking about application. Now, the word application is something, students, you have to remember. So we say managerial economics is applied economics. When you talk about Sigelman and Spencer, it is integration of two subjects for decision making and forward planning. So with that, we move to the next slide, where we touch upon the features of managerial economics. Students, when you read the features of managerial economics, the idea of what this paper has for you becomes even more clear. To have a look at this slide, there are 4 features which are mentioned over here. I want to throw light on the first and the last feature, where the word microeconomic and macroeconomics is mentioned. Now, for those students who are learning this subject for the first time, let me tell you that economics is divided into there are two approaches of looking at the study of economics, the micro and the macro. We will be going into detail what's micro and macro, but for the time being, just remember economics has two approaches, the micro and the macro. The next is normative and part of science of economics. So how will you memorize the feature? Micro, macro, part of science. Now when we say part of science, we are looking at economics as a science, social science. And then we move to normative approach. So let's understand this feature one at a time in the further slides. In this slide, the first feature is explained, that is microeconomic oriented. As I already told you, it's already mentioned here that the study of economics is divided into two approaches. Now what's micro approach? The keyword over here is individual. That means you. If I talk about you as one individual student, I am having a microeconomic approach. Microeconomics deals with particular specific individual unit. In economics, there are various ways of studying the entire working of the economy, like if you open the newspaper and you are, you come across a news with respect to a specific company. Let's say when you are talking about companies which are dealing with, let's say, smartphones. So if you talk about Apple, you talk about Samsung, you are very specific with respect to one individual company, one individual unit. Now that is microeconomics. So this paper of managerial economics is a large proportion of this paper is devoted to microeconomic approach. That means you are going to study most of the topics purely from a microeconomic approach. Now you just have to remember the word over here that anything dealing with individual economic decision is to be considered as microeconomic approach. Next is macro. When you talk about macro, here there are some examples mentioned in this slide. National income, trade cycles. So macroeconomics deals with the working of the entire economy. So what are the key words to remember about macro? Aggregate, total, national, general. So if you just remember these things, then it becomes very easy for you to remember. You'll never forget what's microeconomics and what's macro. In fact, next time when you pick up the newspaper, it would be very easy for you to immediately distinguish between the news that is in micro and the news that goes into macro. Like for example, when we talk about World Trade Organization, which is coming up with some policies. Now those policies will be applicable to all the trading nations. Now that is whole, macroeconomic, right? When you talk about India's economic growth, that's macro. So there are some terms which are very easy, and even if you have not gone into detail of micro and macro, you can still say that this is micro and that is macro. But for simplicity, remember individual, specific, one, and macro is total, aggregate, general and national. Gross word will also come in macro. Now we go to the next feature which is given here is normative approach. Students, remember that apart from micro and macro, when we go into the study, let's say we are talking about Apple as one case study. When you want to study about Apple, how did it begin, how are its, what is the strategy on which it works, how is it able to always be a market leader. So you try to, go into the detailed study of Apple as one industry. You have to have two approaches of looking at the things. One is positive and other is normative. Now what's positive approach? Positive approach is, okay, Apple is one firm, one industry which is existing, it itself is a brand. Now that's positive approach. Some fact which is already known. Anybody, when you give them examples, they already know that you are talking about a product which is already existing. Now if there is some type of, decisions which Apple is changing, some reforms that they are bringing in their business firm, the moment you start thinking, should they bring this change or should they not? You go to normative approach. So to make it little more easier, let's look at the slide, what the slide says. Positive approach says that we are concerned with the situation as it is. So remember this catchy word, as it is. Normative approach, we are concerned with what? As it ought to be. Ought to be means what? As it should be. So which are the two things to always remember? Positive as it is, normative as it should be, as it ought to be. This is, in positive approach we say it's a light bearing science, whereas in normative we say it's a fruit bearing science. Now when we say light bearing science and fruit bearing science, it means that when you discuss about, you just discuss about a fact, about something which is already existing, then we say it is a positive approach of looking at the thing. Something which is known to everyone and you speak about it. So that is a positive approach. Normative is when you put your ideas in that. That means when you start thinking it from a policy making or some type of changes that you think should be there for more effective results. So that is called as normative approach. To make it clear, I have the next slide where I have put across some different examples. It's in a pair. The first and second is one pair of example. A and B is another pair of example. So when you look at 1 and 2, if you see the first statement, it's just a very simple example. The Indian unemployment rate is 9.5%. Positive approach, as it is. So you see the word is there. In the next case, you see the Indian unemployment rate should be lower. So you are prescribing. You are saying that 9.5% unemployment rate is okay, existing in the country. But it is too high. So it should be lower. Now how can the unemployment rate in India be brought down? We have n number of economists and policy makers who are thinking of various policies in which the unemployment rate can be brought down. And if you know that today the Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana, which is very, very popular in India, is basically providing self-employment to all those people who are at a comparatively lower income level. They do not have enough of capital, but they have skill. So this, under this particular program, there is a easy finance which is given to people, skilled people, to become self-employed. And you have so many case studies and success stories of people who have skill taking loan under this, Mudra Yojana, and becoming successful entrepreneurs and having self-employment. So what is this now? This is called normative approach. Now, in that it's like going into detail and trying to think of some type of solutions which can be provided to make it even better. So when there are targets given, like your company gives you a target, now the target set or given to you is positive approach. You say, okay, this is a target given to me. Now how are you going to complete that target? The moment you start thinking that, you are having a normative approach of dealing with that particular situation. Look at second A and B example. Again, this example is given for clarity of positive and normative. I think I need not explain the second. It's self-explanatory. You have understood it, right? So just read it. Keep in mind that in business, to be successful in business, any type of business, apart from positive approach, we also need to have what is called as a normative approach. How do managers take decision at that level? Now, what is coming into my mind is a very negative example, which I don't know whether it's sensible enough to discuss. But it was a recent case where the manager has given a memo to his employees just because they were not able to give the desired output level. And unfortunately, this manager was actually murdered by these employees just because of the fear that they would be losing their job. Now, when you are looking at this situation, it's a fact. The news is giving us a fact. Now, what's the normative approach? Normative approach is what should be the strategy which the managers need to employ. So, like from security concern. So when you are at a management decision making level, whenever you want to give your decision, you need to have a lot of normative approach of how that decision will impact, how that decision has to be taken, how it has to be handled in the business enterprise. So that's what economists are saying, that when you study economics, it's purely giving you laws, theorems, formulas, diagrams. But how are you going to apply it in the field of business is a normative approach. We go to the next feature, which says only a part of science of economics. Now, first of all, remember that when you are looking at this feature, science of economics, as I already stated before also, I repeat again, economics is a social science. So economists are like scientists. Now what is the job of a scientist? To test, right? They make a theory, they build up some hypothesis, they try to test those hypotheses, and then they formulate some laws. Exactly, our economists are also doing that. In fact, whenever the economy is in trouble, it is the economist whom the government looks upon to give them the solution. Now, when an economist has to give a solution in a very troubled economy, they also have to think like a scientist. What is the situation? Okay, what can be done in this situation? And what would be the solution that would be provided at best? Now, what was the example which comes into our mind is the case of demonetization. Now, demonetization and GST, these are the biggest reform which has happened recently in Indian economy. So, do you think the economist, the economic advisor to the government, are thinking like the scientist? Are they thinking on when this policy is implemented, what would be the outcome of this policy? And are they prepared to deal with that outcome, whether it's negative or positive? Positive, it's not a problem. The problem is when it's a negative outcome. Then what has to be a solution? So, only a part of science of economics. So, one thing is clear that it's a scientific study. Okay. So, students, as you see over here, there are various topics which are related to economics. As you see here, welfare, money, agriculture, international trade, public finance. Now, these are all the different areas of economics. Out of this, you are studying one special part of economics, which is managerial economics. So, managerial economics is just a small subset of the entire large domain of economics, which throws light on the working of business firms or business organizations.